waiting on the band to get started. Party room to stay, it's jam, jam. Ooh, child, it's a crowd now. I wanna dance, I wanna dance. Everybody wanna dance, move their bodies round. While the music plays, get down, down, get down, yeah. Break out, freak on the floor, freaks on the floor, all the freaks on the floor. Oh, let's start a ride. Disco whistles blow. Strange, freaky vibes. Flashing lights of red, blue, yellow, and green. It's a funky scene. Looking for the hit. Good all you need. It's gonna be an all-night thing. It's gonna be an all-night thing. So baby, it's an all-night thing. It's gonna be an all-night thing. Yeah. Yes, it is. Uh-huh. Slim Jim moving on in the chic freak. Come on in, 'cause I can't go such a hot piece. Sugar booger, honey, could you live a little close? Enough for you to hear. Baby, don't you know you got me shifting in fifth gear. Look so fine, I want your number in my book. Wanna take you home with me and get it on all night long. It's gonna be an all-night thing. It's gotta be an all-night thing. Sugar, you an all-night thing. It's gonna be an all-night thing. Out loud, shake it and everybody. We can party, shake it, shake it, shake it. Hey, everybody in the husband and working all night. Husband 9 to 5 all my life. Now today gonna live my song. So glad it's Friday. Come on, stop those party.
Moving through, moving through, moving move, moving through, moving, moving through, move that move, move that move, coming through, moving, moving through, move that move, coming through, moving, moving through, move that move, moving through.
Excuse me. Hello and welcome to Madam with Ass Reads. Oh boy, did I do a marathon in the wee hours. I read till like 4 a.m. um this morning. And it is 9:30 now. I'm gonna go as long as I can again. And so we are up to page 50, uh chapter 3.5, and we're gonna keep it moving. And without further ado, let's go. Okay. Going after deserters often brought with it emotional turmoil as well as creating resentment between the military and the FBI. Sometimes we'd follow up on an arrest warrant, locate the guy, and grab him right on the street. Infuriated, he would stop us, rap with his knuckles on a artificial leg, and tell us he'd gotten a Purple Heart and a Silver Star for that and now. What was happening over and over was that deserters who either returned voluntarily or were picked up by the Army itself were routinely sent over to Vietnam as punishment. Many of these guys subsequently distinguished themselves in combat, but the military hadn't told us anything. So, as far as we knew, they were still AWOL. This aggravated the hell out of us. Worse yet was when we'd go to a deserter's listed residence and be told by tearful and rightfully enraged wives or parents that the subject had died a hero's death. We'd be chasing down dead men, killed in action, and the military never got around to letting us know. Regardless of the profession you're in, when you get out into the field, you start realizing all the big and little things they never taught you in school or training. For one, what do you do with your gun in various situations, such as while using a public men's restroom stall? Do you leave it in on your belt down on the floor? Do you try to hang it up on the stall door? For a while, I tried holding it in my lap, but that made me very nervous. Yeah, I bet. It's the kind of thing each of us faces, but not the kind of thing you feel comfortable discussing with your more experienced colleagues. By the time I'd been on the job a month, it became a problem. When I moved to Detroit, I bought another Volkswagen Beetle, the same kind of car, ironically, that was becoming the serial killer vehicle of choice. Ted Bundy had one, and it was one of the ways he was ultimately identified. Anyway, I stopped in a local shopping center to go into a men's store to buy a suit. Knowing I'm going to be trying on clothes, I figured I better have my gun someplace safe. So I stick it in the glove compartment and head into the store. Now, the, Vol- the Volkswagen Beetle had a couple of interesting characteristics. Since it was a rear engine car, the spare tire was stored in the trunk in front. Since it was practically ubiquitous in those days, not to mention easy to break into, spare tires were an extremely common theft item. After all, just about everyone needed one. And last but not least, the trunk was open through a switch in the glove compartment. I'm sure you can guess the rest. I come out to the car and find the window broken. As I reconstruct this highly sophisticated crime, the tire thief breaks into the car, goes in the glove compartment to open the trunk for the tire, but sees there's a much greater prize. I deduce this because my gun is gone and the tire is still there. Oh shit, I'm saying to myself. I've been on the job less than 30 days and I'm already supplying weapons to the enemy. And I knew that losing your gun on your or your credentials means an instant letter of censure. So I go to my squad supervisor, Bob Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick's a big guy, a real father figure. He dresses dapper and is something of a living legend in the bureau. He knows my ass is on the line and how bad I feel. The gun loss has to be reported to the director's office, which is just great since that'll be the first field entry into my personnel file. He says, we've got to come up with something really creative revolving around how I'm so concerned with maintaining the public peace that I didn't want to take the chance of alarming anyone in the store if they suddenly saw a gun and thought they were being robbed. Fitzpatrick reassures me that since I'm not up for promotion for a couple of years, the letter of censure shouldn't hurt me as long as I keep my nose clean from now on. So, that's what I tried to do, though that gun continued to haunt me for a long time. The Smith & Wesson Model 10 I turned into the Quantico Armory about almost 25 years later when I retired from the Bureau was actually the replacement of my original weapon. Thank God that first gun never turned up in a crime. In fact, it essentially disappeared. I lived with two other single agents, Bob McGonigal and Jack Kunst, in a furnished townhouse in Taylor, Michigan, a southern suburb of Detroit. We were great friends, and Bob would later be best man at my wedding. He was also a maniac. He would wear crushed velvet suits and lavender shirts, even during inspections. He seemed to be the only one in the entire FBI who wasn't afraid of Hoover. Later, Bob went into undercover work where he wouldn't have to wear a suit at all. He had started out in the Bureau as a clerk, taking the inside route to become a special agent. Some of the best people in the FBI began as clerks, including several I selected for the investigative support unit. But in certain circles, former clerks were resented as if they had special preference to become agents. Bob was the greatest I have ever known at pretext calls. This was a proactive technique we developed to catch offenders, particularly useful when the element of surprise was paramount. Bob was an artist with accents. If the suspect was in the mob, he'd do an Italian accent. For the Black Panthers, he could pass as a street dude. He also had a Nation of Islam persona, an Irish broke, immigrant Jew, Gross Point Wasp. Not only did he have the voices down cold, he would alter the vocabulary and diction to suit the character. Bob was so good at this that he once called Joe Del Campo, another agent you'll read about in the next chapter, and convinced Joe he was a black militant who wanted to turn FBI informant. In those days, there was a lot of pressure to develop inner city sources. Bob sets up a meeting with Joe, who thinks he's on to something big. No one shows up for Joe's meeting, and the next day in the office, he's really pissed off when Bob greets him with the pretext voice. Arresting the bad guys was one thing, but soon I found myself becoming interested in the thought processes that went on into the crime. Whenever I would arrest someone, I'd ask him questions such as why he chose one bank over another, or what made him select this particular victim. We all knew that robbers preferred to hit banks on Friday afternoons because that's when the most money would be on the premises. But beyond that, I wanted to know what decisions went into the planning and execution of the hit. I must not have seemed very intimidating. Just as they had in school, people felt comfortable opening up to me. The more I questioned these guys, the more I came to understand that the successful criminals were good profilers. They each had a carefully thought through and well-researched profile of the type of bank they preferred. Some like banks near major thoroughfares or interstates so that getaways would be easier and they could be many miles away before a pursuit could be organized. Some like small isolated branches, such as the temporary ones set up in trailers. Many would case a bank ahead of time to get the layout down, to find out how many people work there and how many customers could be expected in the lobby at any given time. Sometimes they would keep visiting bank branches until they found one where no males worked, and that would become the target. Buildings with no windows out to the street were best, since no one on the outside could witness the robbery in progress, and witnesses on the inside would be unable to identify the getaway car. The best practitioners had come to the conclusion that a hold-up note was better than a public announcement, waving a gun, and they'd always remember to take the note back before they left so as not to leave evidence. The best getaway car was a stolen one, and the best scenario of all was to have the car parked ahead of time so that it isn't noticed pulling up. You walk up to the bank, then drive away after the job. A robber who'd been particularly successful at a particular bank might watch it for a while, and if conditions remained the same, he'd hit the same one again within a couple of months. Of all public facilities, banks are about the best set up to deal with robbery. Yet I was continually amazed when I did follow-up investigations at how many would have neglected to load film in the surveillance cameras. How many had set off a silent alarm accidentally, then forgotten to reset it, or tripped it so often that the police would respond slowly because they figured it was just another accident. This was like hanging out a rob me sign to a sophisticated criminal. But if you started profiling the cases, I hadn't attached this term to the process yet, you could begin seeing patterns. And once you begin seeing patterns, you could start taking proactive measures to catch the bad guys. For example, if you started to see that a rash of bank robberies, if you started to see that a rash of bank robberies all seemed to fit together, and if you talked to enough perpetrators to understand what it was in each of these jobs that appealed to them, you could obviously and heavily fortify all bank offices that met the criteria except for one. This one, of course, would be the under constant police and or FBI surveillance with plainclothes details inside. In effect, you could force the robber to select the bank of your choosing and be ready for him when he did. When this kind of proactive tactic was employed, the bank robbery clearance rates went way up. Whatever we did in those days, we did under the looming presence of J. Edgar Hoover, just as our predecessors had since 1924. In this age of musical chairs appointments and trial by public opinion, it's difficult to convey the degree of power and control Hoover exercised, not only over the FBI, but government leaders, the media, and the public at large. If you wanted to write a book or a script about the Bureau, such as Don Whitehead's huge 1950s bestseller, The FBI Story, or the popular James Stewart movie based on it, or produce a TV series such as Ephraim Zimbalist Jr.'s The FBI of the 1960s, you had to have Mr. Hoover's personal approval and blessing. Likewise, if you were a high government official, you would always have that nagging fear that the director had something on you, particularly if he called in friendly tones to let you know the FBI had uncovered a nasty rumor that he would do everything he could to make sure never became damagingly public. Nowhere was Mr. Hoover's personal mystique stronger than in the FBI branch offices and among the Bureau's management. It was an accepted it was an accepted fact that the FBI held the prestige and admiration it did because of him. He had almost single-handedly built the agency into what it was, and he was tireless in his fights for budget increases and pay raises. He was both revered and feared, and if you didn't think much of him, you kept it to yourself. Discipline was fierce, and branch inspections were bloodbaths. If the inspectors didn't find enough things that needed improvement, Hoover might suspect they weren't doing their jobs exhaustively enough, which meant they would require a certain number of letters of censure from each inspection, whether the conditions warranted them or not. Damn, it was like a quota for issuing traffic tickets. It got so bad that the special agents in charge, known as SACs, would find sacrificial lambs who weren't immediately up for promotion, so that letters of censure wouldn't hurt their careers. Wow. Mm. Who agrees to that? Just take this letter of censure. We know you've been doing what you got to do, and we haven't found anything first in our inspection, but we're going to give you a letter of censure. You're not up for promotion within the next 2 or 3 years anyway, so it's not going to mean anything. No, I wouldn't accept that. I wouldn't accept that. That's crazy. One time, in a story that no longer has a very humorous ring after the horrific 1995 bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, a bomb threat to the FBI office was called in after an inspection. The call was traced to a phone booth just outside the federal building downtown where the field office was located. Authorities from headquarters came in and removed the entire phone booth and wanted to compare the fingerprints on the coins in the phone box with those of all 350 individuals in the office. Fortunately for all of us, reason prevailed that the examination never took place, but that was an example of the tension Mr. Hoover's policies would cause. Damn. There were standard operating procedures for everything. Though I never had the opportunity to meet Mr. Hoover in a one-on-one setting, I did and still do have a personally autographed photo of him in my office. There was even a standard procedure for getting such a photo as a young agent. The SAC would tell you to have his secretary write a kiss-ass letter for you, elaborating on how proud you were to be an FBI special agent and how much you admired Mr. Hoover. If you'd written your letter properly, you'd receive a photo with best wishes to you as a sign for all to see of your personal connection to the leader. Certain other procedures we never knew for sure where they came from, whether they were Hoover's personal directives or merely an overzealous interpretation of the director's wishes. Everyone in the office was expected to put in overtime, and everyone was supposed to be above the office average. I'm sure you see the dilemma. Month by month, like some crazy pyramid scheme, the hours would keep growing. Agents who came into the Bureau with the highest morals and character would be forced to learn to inflate their timesheets. Wow. There was to be no smoking or coffee drinking in the office. You couldn't drink coffee in the office? I didn't understand smoking, but you couldn't drink coffee? How? And like a force of door to door salesmen, agents were discouraged from hanging around the office at all, even to use the telephone. Therefore, each man developed his own work habits to get around this. I spent a lot of time going over my cases at a Carrel at the public library. One of the greatest adherents to the gospel according to St. Edgar was that our sack, Neil Welch, nicknamed the Grape. Welch was a big guy, about 6'4", with heavy horn-rimmed glasses. He was stern and stoic, not at all warm and fuzzy. He enjoyed a distinguished career in the Bureau, going on to head field offices in Philadelphia and New York, among others. There was some talk he would take Hoover's place when, or should I say, if, the inevitable day finally arrived. In New York, Welch formed a group that was the first to effectively use the federal RICO conspiracy statutes, racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations, against organized crime. But back in Detroit, he went by the book. Naturally and inevitably, Welch and Bob McGonigal would clash. And it happened one Saturday when we were at home. Bob got a call that the Grape wanted to see him immediately, along with our squad supervisor, Bob Fitzpatrick. So McGonigal goes in and Welch tells him someone's been using the phone to call New Jersey. It's against the rules to use the phone for personal business. Actually, what he'd been doing could have been interpreted either way, but in the FBI, you erred on the side you erred on the side of caution. Welch, who would be really fierce, starts out generally using good interrogation techniques that put the subject on the spot. Okay, McGonigal, what about those telephone calls? So Bob starts confessing to any call he can think of because he's afraid Welch might have something more serious on him, and maybe he can satisfy the sack's wrath by giving him the petty stuff. Welch rises to his full imposing height, leans over his desk, and points his finger menacingly. McGonigal, let me tell you something. You've got two strikes against you. First, you're a former clerk. I hate fucking clerks. The second thing is, if I ever see you wearing a lavender-colored shirt, particularly during inspection, I'm gonna kick your ass up and down East Jefferson. And if I ever see you near a telephone, I'm gonna throw your ass down the elevator shaft. Now get out of my office. Bob comes home a beaten man, convinced he's going to be fired. Jack Kunst and I really feel sorry for him. But what Fitzpatrick tells me the next day is that after McGonigal left, he and Welch sat there laughing their asses off. Years later, when I headed up the investigative support unit, I would get asked if, with all that we knew about criminal behavior and crime scene analysis, any of us could commit the perfect murder. I always told them no, that even with all we knew, our post-offense behavior would still give us away. I think the incident between McGonigal and Welch proves that even a first-rate FBI agent isn't immune to the pressures of the right interrogator. By the way, from the moment he left the Sachs office that Saturday afternoon, Bob wore the whitest shirts in town until Neil Welch was transferred to Philadelphia. Much of Hoover's leverage in getting his funding request through Congress had to do with the statistics he could throw around. But for the director to be able to use these numbers, everyone in the field had to deliver. Early in 1972, so the story goes, Welch promised the boss 150 gambling arrests. That apparently was the category needing a boost in numbers at the time. We was we set up an elaborate sting with informants, wiretaps, and military-like planning, all to culminate on Super Bowl Sunday, the biggest illegal gambling day of the year. The Dallas Cowboys, who lost a close contest to the Baltimore Colts the year before, were playing the Miami Dolphins in New Orleans. Arrests of bookies have to be lightning fast, precision procedures because, oh, I'm sorry, arrests of bookies have to be lightning fast, precision procedures because they use flash paper, which burns instantly, or potato paper, which is water soluble. The operation promised to be something of a mess because there had been intermittent showers all day. Our sting netted more than 200 gamblers on that rainy afternoon. At one point, I had a subject handcuffed in the back of the car, bringing him back to the armory where we were booking them all. He was a charming guy, friendly. He was handsome, too. Looked like Paul Newman. He said to me, sometimes when this is all over, we ought to get together for some racquetball. He was approachable enough, so I started asking him questions just the way I've been asking bank robbers. Why do you do this stuff? I love it, he replied. You can arrest all of us today, John, and it won't make a big difference. But for a smart guy like you, making money legitimately should be easy. He shook his head like I still don't get it. It was raining harder now. He glanced to the side, directing my attention to the car's window. You see those two raindrops? He pointed. I bet you the one on the left will get to the bottom of the glass before the one on the right does. We don't need the Super Bowl. All we need is two little raindrops. You can't stop us, John, no matter what you do. It's what we are. For me, this brief encounter was like a bolt out of the blue, like an instant cessation of ignorance. It may seem naive in retrospect, but suddenly everything I've been asking, all of my research with bank robbers and other criminals came crystal clear. It's what we are. There was something inherent deep within the criminal's mind and psyche that compelled him to do the things in a certain way. Later, when I started research into the minds and motivation of serial murderers, then to analyze, when I began analyzing crime scenes for behavioral clues, I would look for the one element or set of elements that made the crime and the criminal stand out, that represented what he was. Eventually, I would come up with the term signature to describe this unique element and personal compulsion which remained static. And I would use it as distinguishable from the traditional concept of modus operandi, which is fluid and can change. This became the core of what we do in the investigative support unit. As it turned out, all the hundreds of arrests we made that Super Bowl Sunday were thrown out of court on technical procedure. In everyone's haste to get the operation up and running, an assistant to the Attorney General, rather than the Attorney General himself, had signed the search warrants. But the sack Welch had fulfilled his promise and delivered his numbers to Hoover, at least long enough for them to have the desired impact on Capitol Hill. And I had come up with an insight that was to become critical in my law enforcement career simply by betting on raindrops. All right, we at chapter 4. Title is Between Two Worlds. It was a hijacking case involving the interstate theft of a truckload of J&B Scotch worth about $100,000. It was spring of 1971, and I had been on the job in Detroit going on 6 months. The warehouse foreman had tipped us off where they were going to make the exchange of money for the stolen booze. We were working it as a joint FBI Detroit police operation, but both organizations had met separately for planning. Only the higher ups had talked to each other, and whatever they decided hadn't filtered down to the street. So when the time came to make the arrest, no one was quite sure what anyone else was doing. It's nighttime, the outskirts of the city by a set of railroad tracks. I'm driving one of the FBI cars with my squad supervisor, Bob Fitzpatrick, in the next seat, in the seat next to me. The informant was Fitzpatrick's, and Bob McGonigal was the case agent. Word comes over the radio. Bust them! Bust them! We all come screeching to a halt surrounding the semi. The driver opens the door, bolts out, and starts running. Along with an agent in another car, I open the door and get out, pull out my gun, and start running after him. It's dark. We're all dressed down, no suits or ties or anything, and I will never ever forget the whites of his eyes as I see a uniformed cop holding a shotgun aimed directly at me, and he's yelling, "Halt! Police! Drop the gun!" We're less than 8 feet from each other, and I realize this guy's about to shoot me. I freeze, at the same time coming to grips with the fact that if I make the wrong move, I'm history. I'm about to drop my gun and put up my hands when I hear Bob Fitzpatrick's voice frantically shouting, "He's FBI! He's an FBI agent!" The cop lowers his shotgun, and instinctively I take off again after the driver, adrenaline pumping, trying to make up the distance I've lost. The other agent and I reach him together. We tackle him to the ground and cuff him, more roughly than necessary. I'm so keyed up. But the frozen but that frozen couple of seconds when I thought I was going to be blown away was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. Many times since then, as I've tried to put myself in the shoes and heads of rape and murder victims, as I forced myself to imagine what they must have been thinking and going through at the moment of attack, I've recalled my own fear, and it's helped me to really understand cases from the victim's point of view. At the same time that a lot of us younger guys were busting our humps trying to make as many arrests as we could, many of the burnt out old timers seemed to have the attitude that rocking the boat was senseless, that you got paid the same whether you put yourself out on a limb or not. And that initiative was something for salesmen. Since we were encouraged to spend most of our time out of the office, window shopping, sitting in the park, or reading the Wall Street Journal became favorite pastimes for a certain segment of the agent force. Being the blue flamer that I was, I took it upon myself to write a memo suggesting a merit pay system to encourage the people who were being most productive. I gave my memo that I gave my memo to our ASAC, pronounced ASAC, or Assistant Special Agent in Charge Tom Nally. Nally, actually. Tom calls me into his office, closes the door, picks up the memo from his desk, and smiles benevolently at me. What are you worried about, John? You'll get your GS-11, he says as he rips the memo in half. You'll get your GS-12, he says as he tears it in half again. You'll get your GS-13. Another rip, and by now he's really laughing. Don't rock the boat, Douglas, is his final advice as he lets the pieces of the memo flutter into the trash can. 15 years later, long after J. Edgar Hoover was dead and at least somewhat gone, the FBI did implement a merit pay system, though when they finally got around to it, they obviously managed it with no help from me. One evening in May, actually, I remember it was a Friday after May 17th for reasons that will become clear in a moment. I was with Bob McGonigal and Jack Kunst in a bar where we used to hang out across the street from the office called Jim's Garage. There's a rock and roll band playing. We've all had a few too many beers, and when suddenly this attractive young woman comes in with a girlfriend. And she reminds me of a young Sophia Loren, dressed in the trendy outfit of the times, a short blue dress and go-go boots practically up to her groin. I call out, "Hey, Blue, come over here." So, to my surprise, she and the friend do. Now, her name is Pam Modica, and we start joking around, hitting it off. Turns out it was her 21st birthday, and she and the friend were out celebrating her legal right to drink. She seems to be into my sense of humor, and later I find out her first impression of me was good looking, but kind of nerdy with my short government issued haircut. We leave gyms and spend the rest of the night bar hopping. In the next couple of weeks, we got to know each other better. She lived within the city of Detroit and had gone to Pershing High, a practically all black school where basketball great Elvin Hayes went. And when I met her, she was attending Eastern Michigan University. Yeah, well, if you from Michigan, what's that place in how do you pronounce that? YPSCSILANTI. I ain't even gonna try. I guess the Y is silent. Whatever. Things developed pretty quickly between us, although not without its social costs to Pam. This was 1971. The Vietnam was still on, and distrust of the FBI was rampant on college campuses. Many of her friends didn't want to associate with us, convinced I was an established plant who was reporting back on their activities to some higher authority. The entire notion that these kids were important enough to be spied on was ludicrous, except that the FBI was doing that sort of thing back then. Mm, mm, mm. I remember going with Pam to a sociology class. I sat in the back of the room listening to the lecturer, a young radical assistant professor, very cool, very with it. But I kept looking at the professor, and her gaze kept coming back to me. And it was obvious she was really bothered by my being there. Anyone from the FBI was the enemy, even if he was the boyfriend of one of her students. Looking back on the incident, I realized how unsettling an effect you can sometimes have just by being yourself. and my unit and I use this tool to our advantage. In a vicious murder case up in Alaska, my colleague, Judd Ray, who is black, got a racist defendant to come unglued on a witness stand by sitting next to and being friendly to the man's girlfriend. During Pam's early college years at Eastern Michigan, a serial killer was working, though we didn't yet use that terminology. He struck first in July of 1967 when a young woman named Mary Flezer disappeared from the campus. Her decomposed body was found a month later. She had been stabbed to death and her hands and feet hacked off. A year later, the body of Joan Shell, a student at the University of Michigan in nearby Ann Arbor, was discovered. She'd been raped and stabbed almost 50 times. Then another body was found in, I'll just say Salanti, I don't know. The killings, which became known as the Michigan murders, escalated, and women at both universities lived in terror. Each body that turned up bore evidence of horrible abuse. By the time a University of Michigan student named John Norman Collins was arrested in 1969, almost by chance by his uncle, State Police Corporal David Leake, 6 co-eds, and one 13-year-old girl had met grisly deaths. Collins was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment about 3 months before I entered the Bureau. But I often wondered if the Bureau had known then what we do now, if the monster could have been trapped before he had been responsible for so much misery. Even after his capture, his specter continued to haunt both campuses, as Ted Bundy's would haunt other colleges only a few years later. With the memory of the hideous crime so much a part of Pam's recent life, they became a part of mine as well. And I think it's more than likely, at least on a subconscious level, that when I began studying, then hunting serial killers, John Norman Collins and his beautiful, innocent victims were very much with me. I was 5 years older than Pam, but since she was in college and I was out in the working world of law enforcement, it often seemed like a generation gap. In public, she was often quiet and seemingly passive around me and my friends, and I'm afraid we sometimes took advantage of this. One time, Bob McGonigal and I met Pam for lunch at a hotel restaurant that overlooked the downtown area. We're both in dark suits and wingtips, and Pam is in perky co-ed casual. Afterward, we're taking the elevator back down to the lobby, and it seems like it's stopping on every floor. Each time, it gets a little more packed. About halfway down, Bob turns to Pam and says, "We really enjoyed ourselves today. Next time we're in town, we'll definitely give you a call." Pam is looking down at the floor, trying not to react at all when I jumped in. "And next time, I'll bring the whipped cream and you bring the cherries." The other passengers are all looking at each other, squirming uncomfortably, until Pam bursts out laughing. Then they look at the three of us like we were some kind of perverts. Pam was scheduled to be an exchange student in Coventry, England for the fall semester, and by late August, when she flew over, I was pretty sure she was the girl I wanted to marry. Oh, it never occurred to me at the time to ask Pam if she had similar feelings about me. I just assumed that she must. For real? Well, I guess. Mm, you know what? with that, I'll play this song so I can just take a little break. Let's see. Mhm. Let's see. I'm going to read that one more time. By late August, when she flew over, I was pretty sure she was the girl I wanted to marry. It never occurred to me at the time to ask Pam if she had similar feelings about me. I just assumed that she must. Well, isn't that special? Aw. Be right back.
Like a moth to a flame burned by the fire. My love is blind, can't you see my desire? That's the way love goes. Like a moth to a flame burned by the fire. My love is blind, can't you see my desire? Like a moth to
that's the way love, that's the way love, that's the way love, that's the way love, that's the way love,
That's the way love goes.
We just gonna hear another song about, since that was something we were just reading about in this great book, where there's not so many tender moments like that. So let's just bask in that for another song, if you don't mind. Be right back. While she was away, we wrote each other constantly. I spent a lot of time at her family's house at 622 Alameda Street near the Michigan State Fairgrounds. Pam's father had died when she was a little girl, but I took advantage of the hospitality of her mom, Rosalie, eating there several nights a week and profiling her, as well as Pam's brothers and sisters, to try to figure out what Pam was like. During this time, I met another woman whom Pam thereafter referred to, though she had never met her, as the golf babe. Again, we met at a bar, and when I look back on it, I must have been spending more than my share of time in bars. She was in her early 20s, quite attractive, and recently out of college. We'd practically just met when she insists I come home with her to dinner. Turns out she lives in Dearborn, which is Ford World headquarters, and her father is a major auto executive. They live in this big stone house with a swimming pool, original art, fancy furniture. Her father is in his late 40s, the image of corporate success. Her mother is gracious and elegant. We're sitting at the dinner table, flanked by my new friend's younger brother and sister. I'm profiling this family, trying to figure out their net worth. At the same time, they're trying to assess me. Everything is going too well. They seem impressed that I'm an FBI agent, a welcome change from what I'm used to from Pam's circle. But of course, these people are as establishment as they come. I'm really getting nervous, and I realize the reason is that they've practically got me married off. The father's asking me about my family, my background, my military service. I tell him about my job running Air Force Base athletic facilities. Then he tells me that he and an associate own a golf course near Detroit. He goes on about this fairway and that dog leg, and I'm upping my estimate of his assets by the second. John, do you play golf? He asked. No, Dad, I responded without missing a beat, but I'd sure like to learn. That was it. We all break up. I spent the night there on the couch in the den. In the middle of the night, I was visited by the girl who had somehow managed to sleepwalk down to see me. Maybe it was the idea of being in this fancy house. Maybe it was my instinctive fear since I joined the bureau being set up. But I was scared off by her aggression. Oh, I was scared off by her aggressiveness, which matched that of the rest of her family. I left the next morning, having enjoyed their hospitality and a terrific dinner, but I knew I'd lost my shot at the good life. Pam came home from England a couple of days before Christmas 1971. I had decided to pop the question and had bought a diamond engagement ring. In those days, the Bureau had contacts for just about anything you wanted to buy. The company whom I bought the ring was grateful to us for cracking a jewelry heist and gave excellent deals to agents. With this preferred price, the biggest diamond ring I could afford was 1.25 carats. But I decided if she first saw it at the bottom of the champagne glass, not only would she think I was exceedingly clever, it would also make the diamond look as if it were 3 carats. I took her to an Italian restaurant on 8 Mile Road near her house. My intention was that whenever she got up to go to the ladies' room, I dropped the ring into her glass. But she never went. So the next night, I took her to the same restaurant again, but with the same results. Having sat on numerous stakeouts by that time, with sitting in a car for hours on end and having to hold it in was a genuine occupational drawback. I really had to admire her. But maybe this was supposed to be some sort of divine message that I wasn't ready to jump into marriage. The next night was Christmas Eve, and we were at her mother's house with the entire family crowded around. This was my now or never moment. We'd been drinking Asti Spumante, which she loved, and finally she left the room for a minute to go into the kitchen. When she came back, she was sitting in my lap. We drank a toast, and if I hadn't stopped her, she would have swallowed the ring. So much for looking like 3 carats. She never even saw it until I pointed it out. I wondered if there was a message here. The important thing, though, was that I had set up my interrogation scene to obtain the intended result. Having staged the scene so carefully, surrounding us with her siblings and her mother, who adored me, I hadn't left Pam many options. She said yes. We would be married the following June. Oh, for the second year assignments, most of the single agents were being sent to New York or Chicago under the logic that it would be less of a hardship for them than the married guys. I didn't have any particular preference and ended up assigned to Milwaukee, which sounded like an okay city, even though I'd never been there and had no real idea where it was. I would move there in January and get settled in. Then Pam would join me after the wedding. I found a place in the Juneau Village Apartments on Juneau Avenue, not too far from the Milwaukee field office in the federal building on North Jackson Street. This turned out to be a tactical mistake because whatever happened, the response was always, "Go get Douglas. He's only 3 blocks away." Even before I arrived in Milwaukee, the woman in the office knew who I was, specifically one of the only 2 single agents. In my first few weeks, they fought to take my dictation, even though I had little to do. Everyone wanted to be around me. But after a few weeks, when word gradually got around that I was engaged, I quickly became like the 6th day of the 5-day deodorant. The atmosphere in the Milwaukee field office turned out to be a replay of Detroit, only more so. My first sack there was a man named Ed Hayes, whom everyone called Fast Eddie. He was always red as a beet and dropped dead from high blood pressure shortly after his retirement, and was always walking around snapping his fingers and shouting, "Get out of the office! Get out of the office!" I said, "Where am I supposed to go? I just got here. I don't even have a car. I don't have any cases." He shot back, "I don't care where you go. Get out of the office." So I left. In those days, it wasn't uncommon to go into a library or walk down Wisconsin Avenue near the office and find several agents window shopping because they had nowhere else to be. It was during this time that I bought my next car, a Ford Torino, through a car dealer with whom the Bureau had contacts. Our next sack, Herb Hoxie, was brought in from Little Rock, Arkansas field office. Recruiting was always a big issue for Sachs, and as soon as Hoxie, I'm sorry, he was already under the gun. Each field office had a monthly quota for both agents and non-clerical personnel. Hoxie called me into his office and told me I was to be in charge of recruiting. This assignment generally went to a single guy because it involved a lot of traveling around the state. "Why me?" I asked. "Because we had to take the last guy off and he's lucky not to be fired." He'd been going into the local high schools and interviewing the girls for clerical positions. Hoover was still alive and there were no female agents in those days. He would ask some questions as if from a prepared list. One of them was, "Are you a virgin?" If she answered no, he'd ask out for a date. Parents started complaining and the sack had to slam dunk him. I started recruiting from all over the state. Soon I was bringing in almost 4 times the quota. I was the most productive recruiter in the country. The problem was I was too good. They wouldn't take me off. And when I told Herb I really didn't want to do it anymore, that I hadn't joined the FBI to do personnel, he threatened to put me in the civil rights detail, which meant investigating police departments and officers accused of brutalizing suspects and prisoners or of discrimination against minorities. This was not exactly the most popular job in the Bureau either. I thought this was a hell of a way to reward me for my good work. So I cut myself a deal. Cockily, I agreed to continue producing the big recruiting numbers if Hoaxie would assign me as his primary relief or substitute, and if I got the use of a bureau car and a recommendation for law enforcement assistant administration money for graduate school. I knew that if I didn't want to spend my entire career out in the field, I needed a master's degree. I was already somewhat suspect in the office. Anyone who wanted this much education must be a flaming liberal. At the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, where I began pursuing a master's in educational psychology, nights and weekends, I was perceived as just the opposite. Most of the professors were suspicious of having an FBI agent in their classes, and I never had much patience with all the touchy-feely stuff that was so much a part of psychology. John, I want to I want you to introduce yourself to your neighbor here and tell him what John Douglas is really like. One class, we were all sitting around in a circle. Circles were big in those days. It gradually dawns on me that no one is talking to me. I try to become part of the conversation, but no one will say anything. Finally, I just said, "What is the problem here, folks?" It turns out I have a metal-handled comb sticking out of my pocket, and they all think it's an antenna that I'm recording the class and transmitting it back to headquarters. The paranoid self-importance of these people never ceases to amaze me. At the beginning of May 1972, J. Edgar Hoover died quietly in his sleep at home in Washington. Early in the morning, teletype messages flew from headquarters to every field office. In Milwaukee, we were all called in by the SAC to hear the news. Even though Hoover was in his late 70s and had been around forever, no one really thought he'd ever die. With the king now dead, we all wondered where a new king was going to come from to take his place. L. Patrick Gray, a deputy attorney general and Nixon loyalist, was appointed acting director. He was popular at first for such innovations as finally allowing female agents. It wasn't until his administration loyalties began to conflict with the needs of the Bureau that he began to slip. I was recruiting in Green Bay a few weeks after Hoover's death when I got a call from Pam. She tells me the priest wants to meet with us a few days before the wedding. I'm convinced he thinks he can convert me to Catholicism and score some points with the church brass. But Pam is a good Catholic who's been brought up to respect and obey what the priests tell her. And I knew she'll badger the hell out of me if I don't surrender peacefully. We come to St. Rita's Church together, only she goes in to see the priest by herself first. It reminds me of the police station back when I was in college in Montana, when they separated all of us to check our stories. I'm sure they're planning the conversion strategy. And when they finally call me in, the first thing I say is, "What do you two have in store for the Protestant kid?" The priest is young and friendly, probably in his early 30s. He asks me these general questions such as, "What is love?" And I'm trying to profile him, trying to figure out if there's a particular right answer. These interviews are like the SATs. You're never sure if you've prepared properly. We get into birth control, how the kids are going to be raised, that sort of thing. I start asking him how he feels about being a priest, being celibate, not having his own family. The priest seems like a nice guy, but Pam has told me St. Rita's is a strict traditional church and he's uncomfortable around me, maybe because I'm not Catholic. I'm not sure. I think he's trying to break the ice when he asks me, "Where did you two meet?" Whenever there has been stress in my life, I've always started joking around trying to relieve the tension. Here's my opportunity, I think, and I can't resist it. I slip my chair closer to him. "Well, Father," I begin, "you know, I'm an FBI agent, and I don't know if Pam told you her background." All the while I'm talking, I'm getting closer to him, locking in the eye contact that I already learned to use in interrogations. I just don't want him to look at Pam because I don't know how she's reacting. We met at a place called Jim's Garage, which is a topless go-go bar. Pam worked there as a dancer and was quite good. What really got my attention, though, was she was dancing with these tassels on each of her breasts, and she got them spinning in opposite directions. Take my word for it. It was really something to see. Pam is deathly quiet, not knowing whether to say anything or not. The priest is listening in rapt attention. "Anyway, Father, she got these tassels spinning in opposite directions with greater and greater velocity when all of a sudden one of them flew off into the audience. Everyone grabbed for it. I leaped up and caught it and brought it back to her, and here we are today." His mouth is gaping open. I've got this guy totally believing me when I just break up and start laughing, just as I did for my phony junior high school book report. "You mean this isn't true?" he asked. By this point, Pam has broken up too. We both just shake our heads. I don't know whether the priest is relieved or disappointed. Bob McConaughey was my best man. The morning of the wedding was rainy and dreary, and I was itching to get on with it. I had Bob call Pam at her mother's house and ask if she'd seen or heard from me. She, of course, said no, and Bob offered as how I hadn't come home the night before, and he was afraid I was getting cold feet and backing out. Looking back on it, I can't believe how perverse my sense of humor was. Eventually, Bob started laughing and gave us away, but I was a little disappointed not to have gotten more of a reaction out of her. That is so cruel. Afterward, she told me she was so shell-shocked about the arrangements and so concerned about having her curly hair frizz up in the humidity that the mere disappearance of the groom was a minor concern. Wow. When we exchanged our vows in church that afternoon and the priest pronounced us husband and wife, I was surprised that he had some kind words to say about me. I met John Douglas for the first time the other day, and he got me thinking long and hard about how I feel about my own religious beliefs. God knows what I said to make him think so deeply, but sometimes he works in mysterious ways. The next time I told the tassel story to a priest, it was the one Pam had called in to pray over me in Seattle, and I got him believing it too. We had a brief honeymoon in the Poconos. Heart-shaped bathtub, bears on the ceiling, all the classy stuff. Then drove to Long Island, where my parents had a party for us since few people in my family had been able to come to the wedding. And after we were married, Pam moved to Milwaukee. She had graduated and became a teacher. New teachers all had to do their time serving as substitutes in the roughest inner city schools. One junior high was particularly bad. Teachers were there routinely were shoved and kicked, and a number of rape attempts had been made against the younger female teachers. In junior high? In the 70s? The hell? I'd finally gotten off the recruiting detail and was putting in long hours on the reactive squad mostly handling bank robberies. In spite of the inherent danger of my work, I was more concerned about Pam's situation. At least I had a gun to defend myself. One time, four students forced her into an empty classroom, pouring at her and assaulting her. She managed to scream and break away, but I was furious. I wanted to take some other agents down to the school and kick ass. My best buddy at the time was an agent named Joe Del Campo, who worked with me on bank robbery cases. Why am I pronouncing words that simply are not there? We would hang around this bagel place on Oakland Avenue near the University of Wisconsin's Milwaukee campus. A couple named David and Sarah Goldberg managed it, and before too long, Joe and I became friendly with them. In fact, they started treating us like sons. Some mornings we'd be in there bright and early, wearing our guns and helping the Goldbergs put bagels on billets in the oven. Bialis, and but I don't. I've never seen this word before. Bialys in the oven. We'd eat breakfast, go out and catch a fugitive, follow up on a couple of leads in other cases, then go back for lunch. Joe and I both worked out at the Jewish Community Center, and around Christmas and Hanukkah time, we bought the Goldbergs a membership. Eventually, other agents started hanging around what we simply called Goldberg's Place, and we had a party there, attended by both the SAC and ASAC. Joe Del Campo was a bright guy, multilingual, and excellent with firearms. His prowess played the central role in perhaps the strangest and most confusing situation I've ever been involved with. One day during the winter, Joe and I are in the office interrogating a fugitive we brought in that morning when we get a call that Milwaukee police have a hostage situation. Joe's been up all night on night duty, but we leave our own subject to cool his heels and head out to the scene. When we get there, an old Tudor-style house, we learn that the suspect, Jacob Cohen, is a fugitive accused of killing a police officer in Chicago. He's just shot an FBI agent, Richard Carr, who tried to approach him in his apartment complex, which had been surrounded by a newly trained FBI SWAT team. The crazy guy then ran through the SWAT team perimeter, taking 2 rounds in the buttocks. He grabs a young boy shoveling snow and runs into a house. Now he's got 3 hostages, 2 children and an adult. Ultimately, he lets the adult and one of the kids go. He holds on to the young boy, whose age we estimate at about 10 to 12. At this point, everyone is pissed off. It's freezing cold. Cohen is mad as hell, not exactly helped by the fact he's now got an ass full of lead. The FBI and Milwaukee police are angry at each other for letting the situation degenerate. Um, The SWAT team is pissed off because this was their first big case and they missed him and let him slip through their perimeter. The FBI in general is now out for blood because he's taken down one of their own. And Chicago police have already gotten out the word that they want to come get him. And that, if anyone's going to shoot the suspect, they should have the right. SAC Herb Hoaxie arrives on the scene and makes what I consider a couple of mistakes to compound the ones already made by everyone else. First, he uses a bullhorn, which makes him come across as dictatorial. A private telephone link-up is more sensitive, plus it gives you the flexibility of negotiating in private. Then he makes what I consider his second error. He offers himself as hostage in exchange for the boy. So, Hoaxie gets behind the wheel of an FBI car. The police form a circle around the car as it backs into the driveway. Meanwhile, Del Campo tells me to give him a boost onto the roof of the house. Remember, it's a Tudor with steep, sloping roofs that are slick with ice, and Joe's been up all night. The only weapons he's got is his 2.5-inch barrel 357 Magnum. Cohen comes out of the house with his arm wrapped around the boy's head, holding him close to his body. Detective Detective Beasley of the Milwaukee Police Department steps out from the circle of cops and says, "Jack, we've got what you want. Leave the boy alone." Del Campo is still creeping up the pitch of the roof. The police see him up there and realize what he's up to. The subject and the hostage are getting closer to the car. There's ice and snow everywhere. Then suddenly, the kid slips on the ice, causing Cohen to lose his grip on him. Del Campo comes up over the peak of the roof, figuring that with the short barrel, the bullet may rise. He aims for the neck and gets off one shot. It's a direct hit, an amazing shot right in the middle of the subject's neck. Cohen goes down, but no one can tell whether he's been hit or if it's the boy. Exactly 3 seconds later, the car is riddled with bullets. In the crossfire, Detective Beasley is hit in the Achilles tendon. The boy scrambles on his hands and knees in front of the car, which rolls forward on him because Hoaxie's been hit by flying glass and has lost his control. Fortunately, the boy's not badly hurt. True to FBI form, the local TV news that night shows the special agent in charge, Herbert Hoaxie, on a gurney being moved out of the emergency room with blood trickling from his ear. And while we're wheeling him away, he's giving his statement to the press. All of a sudden, I heard gunfire. Bullets were flying everywhere. I guess I was hit, but I think I'm okay. FBI, God, motherhood, apple pie, etc., etc. But that wasn't the end of it. Fistfights nearly break out, and the police almost beat up Del Campo for taking their shots. The SWAT team isn't any too pleased either because he's made them look bad. They go to ASAC Ed Best to complain, but he stands up for Del Campo and says that Joe salvaged the situation that they let develop. Cohen had between 30 and 40 entrance and exit wounds, but was still alive when they took him away in the ambulance. Fortunately for all concerned, he was DOA at the hospital. Special Agent Carr miraculously survived. Cohen's bullet passed through the trench coat Carr was wearing into his shoulder, ricocheted off his trachea, and lodged into his lung. Carr kept the trench coat with the bullet hole in it and wore it proudly from that day on. Del Campo and I were a terrific team for a while, except when we get on those laughing jags we couldn't get off of. We were at a gay bar once trying to develop some information on a homosexual murder fugitive. It's dark and it takes our eyes some time to adjust. Suddenly, we become aware of all these eyes on us, and we start arguing about which one of us they want. Then we see this sign above the bar: "A hard man is good to find." And we just lose it, cracking up like two goofballs. It never took much. We broke up once talking to an old guy in a wheelchair at a nursing home, and again interviewing a dapper business owner in his mid-40s whose toupee had slipped halfway down his forehead. It didn't matter. If there was any humor anywhere in the situation, Joe and I would find it. As insensitive as it may sound, this was probably a useful talent to have. When you spend your time looking at murder scenes and dump sites, especially those involving children, When you've talked to hundreds, then thousands of victims and their families, when you've seen the absolutely incredible things some human beings are capable of doing to other human beings, you better be able to laugh at silly things. Otherwise, you're going to go crazy. You know, I always talk about how growing up in the funeral business, me and my siblings, we always would, somebody's going to crack a joke. I don't care how bad, how sad a situation is, one of us is going to crack a joke. It's just what we do. What do you call that? A defense mechanism. I so relate to this so much. Unlike a lot of guys who went into law enforcement, I'd never been a gun nut. But ever since the Air Force, I'd always been a good shot. I thought it might be interesting to be on the SWAT team for a while. Every field office had one. It was a part-time job. The 5 team members were called out as needed. I made the team and was assigned as the sniper, the one who stays farthest back and goes for the long shot. All the others on the team had heavy military backgrounds, Green Berets, Rangers, and here I had taught swimming to pilots' wives and kids. The team leader, David Cole, eventually became a deputy assistant director at Quantico, and he was the one who asked me to head up the investigative support unit. In one case, somewhat more straightforward than the Jacob Cohen extravaganza, a guy robbed a bank, then led police on a high-speed chase, ending up barricaded in a warehouse. That was when we were called in. Inside this warehouse, he takes off all his clothes, then puts them back on again. He seems like a real nutcase. Then he asks to have his wife brought to the scene, which they do. In later years, when we'd done more research into this type of personality, we'd understand that you don't do that. You don't agree to this type of demand because the person they ask to see is usually the one whom they perceive as having precipitated the problem in the first place. Therefore, you're putting that individual in great danger and setting them up for a murder-suicide. Fortunately, in this instance, they don't bring her inside the warehouse, but have her talk to him on the phone. And sure enough, as soon as he hangs up, he blows his brains out with a shotgun. We'd all been waiting in position for several hours, and suddenly it was over. But you can't always diffuse stress that quickly, which often leads to warped humor. Geez, why did he have to do that? One of the guys remarked. Douglas is a crackerjack shot. He could have done that for him. I was in Milwaukee for a little more than 5 years. Eventually, Pam and I moved from the apartment on Juneau Avenue to a townhouse on Brown Deer Road, away from the office near the northern city limit. I spent most of my time on bank robberies and built up a string of commendations clearing cases. I found I was almost successful when I could come up with the signature linking several crimes together, a factor that later became the cornerstone of our serial murder analysis. My only notable screw up during this time was that after Jerry Hogan replaced Herb Hoxie as SAC, not many perks went along with the job, but one was a Bureau automobile, and Hogan was proud of his new emerald green Ford LTD. I needed a car for an investigation one day, and none was available. Hogan was out at a meeting, so I asked the ASAC, Arthur Fulton, if I could use the sax. Reluctantly, he agreed. The next thing I know, Jerry's called me into his office, and he's yelling at me for using his car, getting it dirty, and worst of all, bringing it back with a flat. I hadn't even noticed that. Now, Jerry and I get along well, so the whole time he's yelling, I can't keep from laughing. Apparently, this was a mistake. Later that day, my squad supervisor, Ray Byrne, says to me, "You know, John, Jerry Hogan really likes you, but he has to teach you a lesson. He's assigning you to the Indian reservation." These were the days of the Wounded Knee incident and the groundswell of consciousness over Native American rights. We were hated on the reservations as much as in the ghettos of Detroit. The Indians had been treated terribly by the government. When I first arrived at the Menominee reservation up on Green Bay, I couldn't believe the poverty and filth and squalor these people had to live in. So much of their culture had been stripped away from them. They often seemed almost numb to me, largely as a result of the deplorable conditions and the history of government hostility and indifference. On many of the reservations, you saw high incidences of alcoholism, child and spouse abuse, assault, and murder. But because of the utter mistrust of the government, it was nearly impossible for an FBI agent to get any type of cooperation or assistance from witnesses. The local Bureau of Indian Affairs representatives were of no help. Eventually, even family members of victims wouldn't get involved for fear of being seen as collaborating with the enemy. Sometimes by the time you would find out about a murder and get over to the scene, the body would have been there for several days already, infested with insect larvae. I spent more than a month on the reservation, during which time I investigated at least 6 murders. I felt so bad for these people. I was depressed all the time, and I had the luxury of leaving and going home at night. I had just never seen people who, as a group, had so much to overcome. While it was dicey, my time on the Menominee Reservation was the first concentrated dose of murder scene investigation I'd had, which turned out to be the grim but excellent experience. Without question, the best thing that happened during my time in Milwaukee was the birth of our first child, Erica, in November of 1975. We were to have Thanksgiving dinner at a local country club with some friends, Sam and Esther Ruskin, when Pam went into labor. Erica was born the next day. I was working long hours on bank robbery cases and finishing up my graduate degree, and the new baby meant even less sleep. But needless to say, Pam bore the brunt of this. I felt much more family oriented responsibility as a result of fatherhood, and I loved watching Erica grow. Fortunately for all of us, I think, I had not yet begun working child abduction and murder. If I'd really stopped and thought about what was out there, I don't know that I could have adjusted to fatherhood as comfortably. By the time our next child, Lauren, was born in 1980, I was well into it. Becoming a father, I think, also motivated me to try to make more out of myself. I knew that what I was doing wasn't what I wanted to be doing my entire career. Jerry Hogan advised me to put in 10 years in the field before I thought about applying for anything else. That way, I'd have the experience for an ASAC and eventually a SAC posting, then maybe eventually make it to headquarters. But with one child, and I hoped more to come, the life of a field agent moving from office to office didn't seem terribly appealing. As time went on, other perspectives about the job began to evolve. The sniper training and SWAT team exercises had lost their appeal. With my background and interest in psychology, I had my master's by this time. The challenging part of the work, it seemed to me, was trying to manage the situation before it got to the shooting stage. The SAC recommended me for a 2-week hostage negotiation course at the FBI Academy in Quantico, which had only been in operation for a couple of years. There, under the tutelage of such legendary agents as Howard Tetton and Pat Mullaney, not Mullaney, Mullaney, Howard Teton and Pat Mullaney, I got my first real exposure to what was already known then as behavioral science, and that changed my career. All right. What time is it? Okay. I gotta go to work in the morning. I'm gonna make sure I take this book with me, and I'm gonna try and read it tomorrow night, somewhere around 11 p.m. Yeah, between 11 and midnight, I'll be back, and we'll begin with chapter 5. Title is Behavioral Science or BS. I think, yeah, well, I've been enjoying it. It's all interesting to me thus far. But it's about to start getting really, really interesting, more interesting. But I'm enjoying the journey. How about you? Leave an answer in the comment section. Again, if you want to send me an email, madamwithbass7@gmail.com. If you'd like to send a cash app, I'd greatly appreciate it. That's Madam with Bass on the $sign. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you soon. Peace.